This is Duke University.
The little magazines have, as Chuang says, quote, kept our culture from being cautious and settled, or merely sociological, or merely pious. The small magazines, he says, exist to, quote, keep the roads open. About where those roads lead, Chuang can be a little vague, but we can infer that he means roads that are both traveled by and lead to certain kinds of imperiled subjectivity, what he calls, in mid-20th century style, imagination and mind.
Initially, when we started the magazine, of course we had no subscribers when we started, there was no magazine. But at the point of the first issue, when it came out, we had only 200. And these were more or less people we were related to or friends we had badgered into buying a subscription. At that time for $10, you would get 2 issues. Right now, 8 years on, we are at just about 3,500 subscribers, which is still not a lot. The initial run of issue 1 was 2,000 copies. We now do a little more than 10,000 copies.
Kwani, by definition, is still yet subject to a lot of contention. It actually depends on who you're asking. So when you wander into Nairobi and you're trying to ask who's Kwani, we say things like, we are an organization that's trying to expand the creative industry in Kenya through the identification, development, and training of literary talent. This could be developed into something bigger. And this happens with social movements. Social movements, I don't think, sit down with set out immediate goals. I think what happens is that one thing like takes off, and people are like, oh, this worked, and it happens through a group of friends. And what actually happened was that, oh, so we can actually do this. So they put together what we now know as Kwani One, which is a journal. And this journal is a combination of short fiction, creative nonfiction, photographs, interviews. And somehow the thing managed to produce a second journal, managed to expand into a performance space, a reading space that was held every month. They managed to actually move on from just a journal to actually start producing smaller pocket-sized books because of affordability. All the stuff that was being published organically, with very, very few systems, with just the same writers, just meeting a bit more frequently than the Sunday. Asking for favors for people from around, people around them, whether it's accounts, whether it's marketing, whether it's events, whether it's editing, whether it's all these things. Kwani really started off as just a community of writers. A group of writers born in the 70s who felt that literature in Kenya so far was about two names mostly. A guy called Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who actually has lived in America, so he's more of an American writer. I think he's lived in America for the last 20 years. I started asking, is this the only writer we have? So when you talk to some other people, they say that Kwani started off as a question. Is it only Ngugi? What about us?
The things that characterize the little magazine tend to be avant-gardism, especially in the 20th century, kind of modernist aesthetics, poetry, it should be said, and experiment. The thing that we imagined ourselves doing is making a place for the unpublishable or the unsayable. You may remember after September 11th, this was in 2001, the New Yorker published a number of little sort of blurbs, essentially, is all they were, by intellectuals. How should we feel about we have been attacked, right? And Susan Sontag alone said, she's like, well, one thing you can say about these terrorists, it's certainly a mistake to say that they weren't brave, and this was people like, how dare she say such a thing? This is impossible. Well, I don't know, I mean, I was like, right on, Susan, that does seem a good point. And it seemed at that moment that we were in a kind of era of speech codes in which very basic, often somewhat offensive, and often somewhat comical things that one might say had been ruled out temporarily in the name of a new sincerity. We have been hurt, we have been struck, and so forth. And so much as we did wish to be in some way sincere and to say what we meant, it seemed that it was possible to be meaningfully offensive and to say the things that were actually in your heart, again, in print. And that's still pretty much the case. And I do think that our writers, when they are published in places like The New Yorker, are ruined by the editing that The New Yorker does. Not that you can tell, because those articles are still often brilliant, but had they been in our hands, they would have been better.
At a historical moment when life and death hinged on the smallest units of meaning, a comma, a semicolon, a vowel, a consonant, an attention to language was no small thing. It assumed an importance that we could never have anticipated. Writing was not going to save us, but it would enable us to offer alternative trajectories for being and acting. Echoing Billy, Binyavanga adds, Kenya needs more writers, more writing. We need a varied, energetic literary scene in 300 languages, if possible, on any and every possible subject. Kenyan writing should reflect Kenya's diversity, imagining a nation into being through routes other than those prescribed by the national education system and the political scene.
But what I'm trying to describe essentially are pieces which, if someone asks you what they're about, you find yourself saying, it's about this person, concept, or thing, but it's not only about that person, concept, or thing, it's also about these related sets of persons, concepts, or things, but really it's a piece that does something to me. And to go back to Trilling, there's this old knowledge-power distinction he makes in the Function of the Little Magazine essay, where he puts big magazines on the side of knowledge and little magazines on the side of power. And the pieces in M+1 were pieces that were meant to assert their power. Not power in a bullying or macho way, but I mean, this was a kind of power in the way that, for example, a protester asserts his or her power by taking and holding a space and to be seen doing so.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.